I would like to start off by saying that I am not by any means an overly religious person. I do believe in heaven and hell. I do believe in God. And I do believe that we all go somewhere else in the end. I'm not, however, a Bible thumper or even a Sunday attendee. I go to church when my profession permits the availability to go, but otherwise, most of my Sundays are spent riding around in an ambulance. Not my first choice on how to spend my weekends. But hey, we all have to do what we have to do to keep the lights on and food on the table, right? Right. With that being said, I've been an EMT for a little over 15 years now. Not all of which have been at my current station. I've moved around and gotten a taste of different stations in different states. You know, boredom keeps you migrating. My current station is near Homestead, Florida, near the Everglades National Park, out in the Panhandle south of Miami. Please, whatever you do, don't go looking for the person I'm about to tell you about if you live in this area. This is a warning for all local residents to stay away. In my career in travels, I have seen a lot of strange and bizarre accidents and injuries to the human body. Some true accidents, others acts of stupidity where the victim thought they could cheat death to impress some buddies. Newsflash, you cannot cheat death. Trust me, I know all too well. I've seen gunshot wounds, bodies impaled on various objects, limbs torn off clean. You name it, I've seen it. It has all pretty much muted my sympathy for stupidity and given me a gag reflex that would impress the toughest man. So to say, I thought that I had seen it all was an understatement. On the night of Saturday, July 20th, my partner Jim and I were sitting in the ambulance with our driver Ted. We had just left Burger King on East Palm Drive. We stopped to get our heart attacks on buns with a side of horrible indigestion, and a blue raspberry icy, of course. We were sitting in the ambo eating our food and talking, just trying to kill some time till a call came in. Mostly praying no calls would come in, and we could round out the rest of our night and get off on time. Jim and Ted were talking about what they were planning to do on the off days. I was going over a mental checklist of all the projects I had done around my house. We had been stopped for about an hour or so and had plenty of time to finish our meal and clean up our trash when dispatch came over the radio. Any available medics in the area? We have a 2D4 and a 2C1, with a 3BA at redacted. Let me explain the codes and why that series worried the hell out of me. A 2D4 is a snake bite. I hate snakes. A 2C1 is a difficulty breathing or swallowing. So possible, anaphylaxis or hemorrhaging setting in. And a 3B1 is a possible dangerous body area, which means the bite could have been in a sensitive area, making the transmission of the poison or venom more potent and lethal. Or it could mean that the body is in a dangerous location, like the snake or snakes are still in the vicinity, and doing our job could be life-threatening. Honestly, it shouldn't be that hard to distinguish between the two. But when you've been doing this as long as I have, learn that dispatch's code delivery is not always the most reliable. Plan for the worst but hope for the best, and that's how I make it through the day. So Ted kicks the lights and sirens on. Jim and I hop into our chairs and we tear ass across town towards Redacted. We leave the town proper behind us and get out on route Redacted, but quickly we notice we're the only emergency vehicle running. We don't see any other ambulances, no fire trucks, not even a police cruiser. We couldn't have been that close to the scene that we beat everybody else out there. Or were we so far behind that they're already on scene and we're late? But with our adrenaline pumping hard, we barely notice we're mostly alone on the stretch of highway, with no backup to speak of. We pull up to the residence and we are the first ones on the scene. Ted calls in dispatch and informs them. Ambo 3381 arrived on scene, beginning assessment at this time. I don't remember hearing dispatch radio back a confirmation of our arrival. But once again, adrenaline was pumping hard. I was only focused on the scene and the victim. We get out of the ambo. Jim and I are getting our med bag, gloves and stretcher ready with backboard. Jim grabs a couple bottles of the most common anti-venom that we have on hand, figuring that it has to be a cottonmouth or a rattlesnake bite. We start heading towards the house and we're met at the porch by this older woman, a little portly, clearly the supposed victim's mother or grandmother. She started shouting at us so fast that we could barely discern what she's telling us. Jim has to physically grab her and shout at her to calm down before she slows enough to where we can hear what she's trying to tell us. She ends up confirming my initial thought that she is in fact the victim's grandmother. She tells us that her grandson was sent down to stay with her over the summer, and because his parents couldn't handle him, he was just too much for them. And so he was staying with her. She loved having him in the house because it broke up the monotony and gave her some company. And plus, he's her only grandchild. Jim shouts at her again. "Lady, we don't need your life story, just point us to him." She does, and we enter the house. Now, I've been in some really sketchy places before. Drug houses, whorehouses, abandoned warehouses where people just magically got shot while being all alone and no gun in sight. Places that as soon as you enter, the hair on the back of your neck stands up, and you spend the whole time there scanning for threats because you know something or someone else is there hiding, and you don't want to be victim number 2. When I say that this house piqued my sketch radar, I mean it broke the needle, slammed hell off, and it left the building. From the outside, it looked like every other modest single-family home on the block. Nothing weird at all. Even from the inside decor, everything seemed pretty standard. It was the feeling in the house that set me on edge, and I knew immediately that Jim felt it too because he stopped dead in the middle of yelling at the poor old woman, and he looks at me and goes, "What the hell is up with this place?" Middle of July in southern Florida can get quite warm to say the least. I believe the temperature that night was somewhere in the neighborhood of 102 with 68% humidity. So obviously, the woman had her AC cranked up. We could feel the breeze of the AC in the doorway, and we could also see 3 ceiling fans from the front door, all on the highest setting. But as soon as we crossed the threshold into the house, it felt like it was 300 degrees. Jim and I look at each other and then back at the lady, and without saying a word to her, she says, "It's been like that all summer. I've had every AC man in town come look at my unit, and all they say is that there's nothing wrong with it." So Jim tells her, "You better get a home inspection done because no building should be this hot." We cross the living room and head towards the hallway where the boy's bedroom is. That's where his grandmother tells us that he's at. Just as I get to the entrance to the hallway, I hear her whispering directly in my ear, almost like someone was standing right next to me, trying to tell me a secret. I turn to Jim and say, "What was that?" And he asked me, "What?" I told him somebody was whispering in my ear, and he asked me, "Well, what did they say?" I told him that I didn't know because I could not make it out. It almost didn't even sound like English or any real language at all. He just stares at me and says, "Man, I don't know, this house is just giving me the creeps." And I agreed with him. Something in here just wasn't right. We get down the hall and we're already sweating through our uniforms from the heat, and we open the bedroom door to the first room on the left. That was the grandson's room according to the grandmother. We open it and we see a little boy, maybe 12 or 13 years old. A little on the small side, brown hair, a tan complexion, with the most eerie pale blue eyes you've ever seen in your life. It was like they could look into your soul. The boy was just sitting there on his bed, staring at us. I look at Jim again because now I'm at a loss for words. "This is the snakebite victim, right?" This is the kid who has a bite in a potentially life-threatening location. But this kid looked fine. In fact, he looked like he was having a great time. A smile on his face, a creepy pleasant look in his eyes. Jim asks the kid for his name. The kid responds, "Matthew." Jim says, "Okay, Matthew, I'm Jim and this is my partner Steve. We're here to help you and we've been told that you got bit by a snake." Matthew stares at Jim, still smiling, and just nods. Jim then says, "Can you tell me what type of snake it was, so I can give you the correct antivenom?" Matthew shakes his head. Jim goes, "Okay, you don't know what kind of snake it was. Can you at least show me the wound so we can treat it?" Matthew, who's still smiling, says, "I know what kind of snake it was, but you don't have the right antivenom for it." And he just points to his wrist. On it were 9 puncture wounds, all of about snake fang thickness and depth. But they all looked like they came from a single bite, rather than multiple bites. What the hell kind of snake has almost a dozen fangs in its mouth? While I'm trying to figure all this out, Jim's moving closer to inspect the wound. He asks Matthew, "Why don't you think we have an anti-venom for this snake bite? Is it from some exotic pet that you don't want us to know about?" "We won't tell, we just want to get you the right treatment to help save your life." Matthew looks at Jim and then at me, and he says, "'Cause it wasn't a snake. I bit myself." Now I've heard it all. I've seen crackheads with knives sticking out of their backs, who swore up and down that they fell on a knife and it ended up in them. I've seen junkies with needles in their arms still tell me that they had never used drugs before. I've even had one man look me dead in the face and tell me that he doesn't have any heart conditions, but as soon as I cut his shirt off, I can see a little square of the implanted defibrillator. But I've never had a snakebite victim tell me that they had bit themselves before. We play along and I ask Matthew, "So why did you bite yourself?" He tells us, "To build up my tolerance." Tolerance? Tolerance for what? Stupidity? I think to myself, only those ding-dong snake handler religious nutjobs do that kind of goofy crap, not a young child. Now I'm starting to worry about this boy's mental capacity. Because if he believes that he can build up a tolerance to snake venom by being bit several times, and then we're going to be coming out here again. I radio out to Ted in the ambo, and I tell him that we're going to be transporting one young male approximately 12 years of age with unknown snakebite wounds to his right forearm, and to get the route ready that we need to get to the closest hospital ASAP. He copies my transmission and says that we'll take him to Redacted Hospital. I tell him 10-4 and that we're loading up now. I tap Jim on the shoulder and I say, "Let's just move him. The longer we wait, the more time the venom has to work." He agrees and we tell Matthew that we're going to clean his wound here and lightly dress it in gauze to keep out anything that we don't want in there. He just keeps on smiling at us in that creepy fashion, but he nods slightly. We clean his wound out and we look for stray fangs that may have broke off, but we find none. We lightly wrap his hand and wrist and we ask him if he could walk. He nods and we help him to his feet, and we escort him out of the door and into the ambulance. We get him on the stretcher and we toss a buckle around his waist, just to keep him from bouncing around with Ted's driving. Because Ted can be a little scary behind the wheel sometimes. We load Matthew into the ambo and we take off. Jim and I are in the back with Ted speeding towards Redacted Hospital, and we're taking vitals, checking his pupils and looking for skin pigment irregularities. But nothing looks wrong with this kid. His vitals were all normal. His temperature was 98.6. His skin looked good. I couldn't make heads or tails of this. About 1.5 miles from the hospital, Ted shouts from up front, Dang, it's hot in here. Jim and I look at each other because we were dealing with it in the house that we never noticed it in the ambulance. But apparently, whatever made the house so hot, it followed us. We turned and we looked at Matthew when he looked back at us and he smiled. And then he said, "I like it warm." "What the hell does that mean?" said Jim. I looked at Jim and then back at Matthew and I asked, "Are you making it hot?" Where Matthew responds, "Of course. I can make it even hotter too. You want to see?" I quickly said, "Nah, we're good. Thanks anyways." Jim just stares at us like he can't believe his ears any more than I can believe mine. First, this kid claims that he bit himself, and now that he can control temperatures around him. Who the hell is this kid and where did he come from? I get more and more nervous every time this kid looks at me. It's something about those pale blue eyes. It's like he's evaluating the cleanliness of my soul for judgment. Ted is in the driver's seat with the AC on max and the windows open, almost hanging out of it trying to cool off. And Jim and I would swear I heard him saying a quiet prayer. I holler up to Ted and I ask him what's our ETA. He says that we're not going there. They had a major power failure and we're being rerouted up to the next redacted hospital. And great, that's over 45 minutes. More time stuck in the sweat lodge with this creepy ass kid. I tap Jim and I interrupt his personal prayer. And I say that we're being redirected and he swears under his breath. Apparently, we're thinking the same thing. Matthew, however, just sits there smiling. The quiet tension wears on my nerves and I ended up breaking it by asking Matthew, "Okay, if you bit yourself, can you show me the things that you used to do it?" His smile got even wider and he says, "Sure, I'll show you." Right there, I wish to God that I hadn't said anything. His jaw cracked and spread apart about 8 inches. His teeth began to grow and stretch and mutate into these fang-looking things. His smile got even more menacing as the transformation progressed. I began praying out loud at that moment, praying for God to look over us and watch for us cause we were definitely in the presence of evil. Jim just started shouting, and Ted up front hollering back, "What the hell is going on?" Where Jim answers, "Exactly that. Hell." At that moment, our ambo dies. Lights, motor, siren, everything. Complete darkness on the route, redacted in the middle of the freaking Everglades. Jim and I both bail out of the back door, and then he yells to Ted, "Get the hell out, you old bastard." Ted didn't need to be told twice as he came out of the open window. From inside the abandoned ambo, we heard this horrible, deep, growling laughter, like something big is quite amused with itself. And then we heard a voice say,
"If I wanted you dead, you would already be so. You have nothing to fear from me. You're far too gone already."
The hell did it say? You're too far gone already. What does that mean? We're all freaking out. I try my radio to call for backup from anyone. Heck, I'll take backup from the freaking Girl Scouts right about now. Just someone to get us out of here ASAP. My radio's dead and I turn to Jim. "Try your radio." He says, "I already did, mine's dead too." We turn to Ted and he says, "Don't look at me, mine's in the truck and I'm not going back after it either." Shit. Here we are stuck in the middle of the Everglades with some kind of monster, a dead ambulance, dead radios, and we can't call for backup from anybody. What are we going to do? Right then, the lights and sirens of the ambo come back to life and the motor starts back up. The three of us look at each other like, who's gonna go check it out first? Mutual consent was none of us. And then we hear the voice again.
"Don't worry, I'm finished with my game. You all bore me anyway."
And then we hear a loud metal crunching sound and the whole back of the ambulance shakes one good time, and then it goes still. We stand there for what feels like an eternity, trying to figure everything out before we realize that our radios are working again. We hear dispatch calling us.
33A1, we've been calling you for hours. Where are you?
Jim looks at me and then says, "We've been 10-6 on that snakebite call you sent us out on Redacted Road." Dispatch says,
We never called in a snakebite. You guys went dark hours ago. We've got black and whites out looking for y'all.
Ted and Jim and I just stared at each other. What did they mean that they never sent us on a call? We all heard the call and we radioed in that we were on scene. We had the victim. We even radioed back that we were en route to. How could any of the things she was saying be true? Jim tells us her location and says to hurry up and get back up to us because we had a vehicle malfunction with a victim en route. She copies our transmission and says that another ambo company would intercept us and take us to the Redacted Hospital. Wait, wasn't Redacted Hospital rerouting us because of a power failure? Jim repeats this over the radio, and the dispatch comes back.
No, there's no power failure.
What the hell is going on? Jim and I turn to Ted and we ask him, "Didn't you tell us that?" And he says, "Yeah, the hospital called to me in transit and told me to reroute due to a power failure." We're all standing on the side of the highway just beyond confused, not even realizing that the backup ambo company is almost to us. Trying to make heads and tails of how this whole night had started to warp our sense of time and how much of it we had lost since starting this run. The other ambo company gets to us and sees our ambo lights and sirens going, and the motor running and stares like, "What's the problem?" We didn't have the energy to explain, we just said that we had an equipment failure, and that we were transporting a patient. They hop out of their truck and walk back to the rear of ours, and before we yell stop, they snatch the doors open. Now mind you, in our confusion, we lost track of time. When they opened our truck and we all looked inside, it was completely empty, minus one severely mangled stretcher. And they looked at us and just said, "How the hell did you manage that?" pointing at the stretcher. And we couldn't answer them. We all told them that it wasn't like that when we had bailed out. And then they asked, "Where's this patient?" And again we couldn't answer them. He was also there when we bailed the hell out. They looked at us like we were playing a joke on them, and they radioed a dispatch to 1022 that call no patient aboard unit 3381. Dispatch copied and they left. Now we're all standing there on the side of Route Redacted, really scratching our head. The hell just happened? Where did the kid go? Whose voice was that we had heard? And how the hell could a kid bend up a stretcher that badly? We must have stood on the side of the highway for another hour at least, until Ted says, "I don't know about you boys, but I want some answers." Not truly understanding what he means by that, we slowly climb back into the ambo and shut the doors. Ted turns around and quickly Jim and I realize what he meant. He wants to go back to the house. We beg and plead with him not to, but he's pissed now. He doesn't take looking foolish very well, and he's going to get some answers for what we all know we experienced tonight. We pull back up to the house and it all looks the same, nothing here has changed. Ted jumps out and knocks on the door, and the same elderly woman answered it. She greets us and asks how we can help her. And Ted asked her, "Why didn't you follow us to the hospital when we left with your grandson?" Looking very confused, the woman informs us that she doesn't have a grandson, that her only grandson died 8 years ago in a car crash. Ted says, "No ma'am, we were just here a few hours ago when we picked up your grandson, Matthew. He was suffering from a snake bite and we transported him away." She says again that it would be impossible because her grandson Matthew is buried out in the Redacted cemetery. And now this night is just getting stranger. We tell her we were there because she had called 911 for help, and that her grandson was bitten by a snake and we took him. She tells us that we were never there, and that she hasn't called 911 for anything. We apologized for bothering her and we left. Back in the ambulance, we're all trying to figure this out. How is it that 3 grown-ass men could all imagine the exact same thing at the exact same time? And how did the stretcher get mangled? To this day, I still have no answers for that night. But I can tell you this much. Ted, Jim, and myself are in church every single Sunday, and you can find us in the front row for both services.